Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Tobi. I'm the host of Ideas Untrapped podcast, which is the organizer of this. I call it policy shop, but it's basically a meetup between friends. So what we will be discussing today with two amazing people, hopefully three later, is what Nigeria is currently going through, which we call economic reforms, and we just want to examine what the issues are and have a very critical conversation, because like I was telling Chris from working here, the most interesting conversations happen in bedrooms, in dinner parties, at the clubs, you know. So I'm trying to keep this very light, but we want to be as serious and as in-depth as we can be when there's no gaze or there's no media or whatever. So, and the people that will be doing this with me, first of all, is Ijeoma Nwogwugwu. She's the former managing director of Arise News Network. I was telling her before we started that what she has done with, and still doing actually with Arise is amazing. So I had one off-hand experience. I was somewhere in Ikoyi and I was having lunch, and I noticed that a couple of years back, when I sit at that same restaurant, their TV used to be at CNN, you know, but now it's Arise, you know, and you can say the same when you go to banking halls around the country. So it's all due to Ijeoma's amazing work. She's also the editor of this day newspaper, one of the leading newspapers in the country. She's a policy analyst. She writes one of the most amazing columns for this day newspaper. So it's a pleasure for Ijeoma to join me today. Also, last but not least, is Adedayo Bakare. He used to be an investment banker, but now he's a tech bro. So he's currently the Chief Operating Officer of Money Africa, one of the fastest growing startups in the financial education space. And the way I would describe, I said that Adedayo has an amazing story to tell. It's his story, it's not mine, and I hope that one day he'll get to tell it. So, but what I would say is that it was the very second guest of the podcast when we started in 2019, and I would say that it was one of the best conversations I ever had in my life. So Adedayo is brilliant, he's passionate, and I'm always happy to see him, and it's a pleasure to have you here today. Yeah. So the question I'll first put to both of you guys, commenters say that I ask a lot of vague questions. So, and this is going to be vague. So, we are going in quotes through economic reforms again. Now, honest assessment, both of you. Are the reforms yea or nay from what you have seen so far? So are they for real? Do you think they are serious? Are we going in the right direction?
I don't know. If there's a way to stay neutral. I would say I'm leaning more towards the yea.
Okay.
It's still early days. Right, we're not yet 2 months into the new government. And even though they've been slow in some respects, like say announcing the cabinet, I'm sure, of course, I'm optimistic that they wouldn't break the record of the prior president in terms of that. But like they've moved very fast, right? And they're moving very fast on urgent issues. Right? A lot of, and you know, in the campaigns, during the campaigns, politicians can say anything, right? You're usually, you know, very cautious optimistic. And I think one of the new, very interesting developments in the past election was that all three candidates, on certain issues, you could see that they were unanimous to an extent. Right, fuel subsidy was one of that. Usually, it was a political thing, right, where a party would, say, use it to curry favor or to, excite voters. But everybody, they were like, this thing has to go, right? It wasn't that, I didn't think that they understood the fiscal mess Nigeria was in. I'm not too sure any of them fully, sort of understood the damage that has been done over the past ages, but they agreed that, it wasn't going to work. Another thing that they had sort of a consensus on was on the foreign exchange market. That, it was a disaster, we need to clean it up. There was also, that was something, those two issues, on fuel subsidies and on exchange rate reforms, I felt like there was a consensus. Now, I wouldn't, in my wildest imagination, expect that those things would have been tackled within weeks of a new government, right? Especially a government that is not popular. Because when you see, statistics on the elections, I think it was just like 35% of the votes.
Yeah.
Right. So majority of the voters did not even vote for that.
Do you think that quietly that's like the strength for the government?
It shouldn't be the strength.
I can't do unpopular things anyway.
It shouldn't be the strength of a government that is certain, that should be, ordinarily a government should be sensitive, right, to sort of the people, to the citizens. So if you're saying, I think at some point, there was where he said, he's going to remove soil subsidy, and there's nothing you're going to do about it, or something, or, something like that. I mean, it's a very brutal way to push reforms, because it also means that there can be a lot of pushback if it's not accepted, or it's, very unpopular. And the nature of reforms is such that the short-term gains are can be very deep, and, you're not sure whether you're going to see the gains or whether there will be any gains at all. So it's been exciting for the first few weeks. I think what we're waiting to see is sort of something that is more coherent, right? So if you say you're relaxing sort of the restrictions in the FX market, it's been partial. There's still some that have not been done, right? Also, in terms of the reforms they're doing, how does it tie into the overall monetary policy environment of the economy? Right, that has not been changed. So then you get a sense that a lot of the reforms you're seeing also is government-led, like fiscal policy-wise, led, and not led by the CBN. And that monetary policy reforms have to be led by the CBN. So there's a leadership crisis there. I don't know if I should call it a crisis, but I don't think there's sort of a leadership there at the moment, and we don't know what they're going to do in terms of resolving that. So it's exciting. We need to see more in terms of communication, and then in terms of coherence. Everything needs to be aligned. If it's not aligned, you have inflation 22%, interest rates in Nigeria. I think at the last auction, the 1-year treasury bill is around 6%, right? Then the monetary policy rate is 18.5%, right? So it's too misaligned, and all those things filter into what is happening into the business environment, sort of how investors view the country, and also sort of general performance of the FX market, which is why you see a lot of volatility now. Yes, we are seeing improved liquidity in the high FX window, but is it where we need it to be? I'm not sure. So we need more, but it's an exciting start.
Okay, and my take so far is should we really see these things as reforms or policies pronouncements? I think there's some confusion as far as this is concerned. What I'm seeing are policy pronouncements that are all related to revenue, enhancing government revenue. So the government came in and knew they had no fiscal headroom. revenue was challenged. Debt service to revenue was so high, they couldn't do anything. There was excessive borrowing from CBN, and CBN was printing so much money to meet things as simple as salary, obligations, and stuff like that. So everything has been focused simply on revenue, about enhancing revenue. They're not reforms, in my estimation. Reforms have to do with strengthening institutions, improving transparency and accountability. They have to do with reducing chronic capitalism. They have to do with reducing things like corruption and structural weaknesses. They're much more solid than just, tinkering with some policies. Like for instance, the reversal of the CBN issue, the unification of the exchange, it wasn't anything new. It was what the government or what they asked the CBN to do was to reinstate what it had been doing in 2017. It wasn't anything new. CBN simply put a peg on what it had been doing from once there was a COVID crisis. Simply put a currency peg, and then they decided to go back to what it had been doing in 2017 by having managed flows. The removal of petrol subsidies was because NNPC was no longer accountable. It was just taking, it was not remitting money, and so in terms of revenue, the government was getting little or nothing. The 3 tiers of government were getting little or nothing. So they had to address that issue. But in terms of reforms, what I would like to see, for me, from my own perspective, are wholesale reforms that you talked about CBN. CBN has to be there internally. There are so many reforms that have to be. But CBN has totally adopted too many unorthodox policies that need to be changed, that need to be reformed, both from from even something as little as financial system regulation to monetary policies. For instance, they issued a circular yesterday. I saw you guys talking about it. Sometimes I don't talk, what I do is they issued a circular yesterday saying that going forward, what they said is that no person, no shareholder can own 5% of a financial institution except it's approved by the CBN. And so you all assume that it's targeted at certain shareholders. It's not targeted at them. If you look at that circular carefully, it's effective August. It's effective August 1. That circular is effective. So which means now you're saying, and then the question is that should CBN be doing that? Do you understand? Shouldn't it be, why can't people own more than 5%? And should this be the responsibility of CBN or Securities and Exchange? What role does the Securities and Exchange Commission play in all this? CBN seems to be such a dominant operator in the financial system. And do you understand that the others don't have any say? Well, they should, realistically. Those are the kind of things we need to see. Because sometimes there's an interplay amongst these institutions, and then somebody just writes roughshod. And another problem we have is that sometimes it's not even the institution, it's the individual. In Nigeria, we have individuals that are stronger than institutions, and that should not be the case. So we should look at ensuring that the rule of the law is enforced, ensuring that we have strong legal and regulatory frameworks to ensure that people do not become more powerful than the institutions. To ensure that tomorrow we don't have another central bank governor that decides to stay in office and decides that he wants to become a partisan politician. Do you understand? So, and the reforms could also include the petroleum oil and gas sector is in a bad shape. It's not just because of oil thefts. There's a whole load of other issues, from underinvestment to even our reserves dwindling. Our assets are aging. They are no longer as new. That's when you think that we've been producing oil for over 50, 60 years. Most of those fields, especially onshore and in the continental shelf, have aged. So are we going to invest considerable resources trying to try and bring out whatever little that is left there? So do we look at the PIA again? Is it being properly implemented? What are the institutions doing there? The NURP, the regulators, the two regulators, what are they doing to ensure that oil production, oil and gas comes up and not? We seem to place so much emphasis on oil and gas. We have mineral resources in the north that are causing conflict. We all know about them. Just like we will have conflict diamonds in Sierra Leone, in Zamfara, and all those states in the northwest are having conflict. It's because of gold, illicit gold mining that is going on there. We have Ghana next door to us, one of the biggest gold producers on the continent. But everything about the Ghanaian mining industry is regulated. We have the same laws, but we can't enforce them to ensure that we have proper institutions in place that go in there, regulate mining, pay royalties and taxes like they do in Ghana. Why are we not attracting the big multinationals? Some of the biggest operators in Ghana today are all from South Africa, Anglo Gold and what have you. So what is it about our own system and not? These are the things we need to be focused on. We keep talking about the cost of governance all the time. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not into rationalization that is of civil servants, not the personnel. I'm more interested in the rationalization of the agencies, NGOs. We have too many of them falling or tripping over themselves because they're either duplicating each other's functions. A lot of them either through repeals of their establishment acts, some that don't even have establishment acts, can be consolidated so they're made more efficient. That way you have less corruption, less wastage. That for me is what I see, and that is not being addressed at the moment. That is not being looked into at the moment. Perhaps, maybe when they have a cabinet in place, and it is hope that this administration will at least try. I know that they will have to appoint a few politicians into government. Yeah, they will have to appoint a few politicians into government because the nature of politics is you try and reward people who have helped you win your election. It is also imperative that they appoint as many good, very, very good technocrats that are reform-minded, that can think outside the box and implement proper wholesale reforms.
So to quickly touch on something that I think links what you guys talk about. You talk about institutions. So I want to talk about, and you spoke about the leadership crisis. I actually think it is a crisis at the CBN right now. How can a government put the genie back into the box? If I recall, I think in our recent history, this whole thing started with Soludo when the Adedayo government just overrode the currency redenomination, and then there was the Sanusi-Jonathan feud, which led to the suspension. So we are currently in a state where there is presidential erosion of the monetary powers of the CBN, and that seemed to have been the norm now. So how can you put that genie sort of back into the box? What do you do if you have to make that decision politically?
At the end of the day, it's a conscious effort that has to be made by the executive, right? And yes, there's a lot of problems in Nigerian institutions, right? Even in the presidency, where you say the president is so powerful, right? And they have very extensive hands in so many places, and they have so many powers to decide things. And I think the major problem is there's no accountability. We're talking about accountability at the CBN. No matter how good the person you have in all your agencies or institutions, no matter how sound they are, no matter how to the book they are, if at the very top of the country, if you don't have such sort of reforms where the president obeys the rule of law, where they have respect for other institutions that should hold them accountable, right? So from the judiciary to the legislature, where you have reforms in even those institutions themselves, I don't think anything is going to change, right? And at the end of the day, you just think about politicians. Most of the change that requires still has to come from politicians. It has to be them. I mean, in almost every country in the world, you weren't born to perfection. No country was automatically perfect. It was people in leadership that realized that certain things needed to change, right? And they ensured they changed it, and the entire country sort of bought into it, right? So I think it's a change that the MDAs and all those institutions, I'm not really concerned about them, is the will at the top. And unfortunately, it is politics, right? I'm not a political expert. It's politics. What happens in, from the appointment of the judiciary, which is also a contentious issue even in the US, right? Where they would say, oh, this party is appointing this person, that party. So again, it's still very political. Even the judiciary is political. The legislature, where you have a situation where one single party has an overwhelming majority. I think that we don't have that again, right? But even when you see that, when you have politicians who are very fickle, who they don't hold on to any ideals or anything, you can see, a decision you would expect. Maybe they have something on the floor of the house that they're debating, and you expect maybe these people to behave a certain way, and you see them aligning with, it's a lot of personal. It's very driven by personal interest, and I think until politics is reformed, right, or we start having, sort of better politicians who see the need that things should be better, right, then it's going to be extremely difficult. And I like the example that I've seen used in so many quarters where, prior to 1999, we're not a very democratic country, right? And now, you're having elections. Yes, they've been very messy. I can't say we're seeing improvements, if we're seeing any at all. But one thing that everybody sort of believes in the country now is, to be a president, you have to be elected, right? I think to a great extent there's a consensus on that. And that if you are not elected, right, you have to go and fight through the legal system to, reclaim your mandate. I don't think, I think you all started in the early mid to late 2000s to start seeing those things. And that has sort of stuck in the political environment. I remember there was a time in elections, during elections in Nigeria, they have to go and meet the major candidates, CSOs, civil society organizations, right, and telling them, oh, you have to commit to a peace pact, right? That after the elections, you have to, there will be violence or things like that. And lately, I don't think we've seen a lot of that. Even, in the last elections, there wasn't a lot of that, right? So we've seen that sort of improvement. That sort of improvement is what we need to see in the legislature, then at the presidential level. Because at the end of the day, if you're a good person in a good institution and everything is going well, the president can unilaterally decide, which is what we saw with Soludo, right? Where the president is saying, oh, this currency policy should not be, right? Or what you have with Sanusi and what then you have with Godwin Emefiele, even though Godwin Emefiele was a very open alliance, right, with the presidency. But I think it's something that has to change. I don't think there's anything that, unless you can hypnotize politicians and tell them what to do. I don't have such powers. I don't believe anybody has such powers. So we have to just, again, keep hoping that leadership just becomes better. I'm not an expert at how to transform leadership as well. So that's all I know.
The way I see it is that, as far as the presidency's overreach, as far as the CBN government is concerned, we should always remember one thing. The CBN is part of the executive. It's not part of the legislature, not the judiciary. And under a democratic system of governance, the presidential system, where the separation of powers is only recognized between the executive, legislature, and judiciary. The CBN governor serves at the pleasure of the president. So you cannot tell me that if the CBN governor is caught to be corrupt or stealing, the president cannot ask for his resignation. He can't. Irrespective of whether the CBN administration is supposed to be I call it pseudo-independence, because no central bank, no reserve bank in the world is completely independent, not even the US Fed. When Trump is making noise, he wants to see interest rates going up or down, he's sending messages to Jeremy Powell. When he's commenting on such issues, so no central bank, not even the US, is that independent. They have some measure of independence, but not completely. So if the CBN governor is found to have done something that questions his integrity, has mismanaged the CBN, or is found to be corrupt, the president can either call him and ask for his resignation, or send a letter to the Senate, as provided by its Establishments Act, and ask that they give him the vote by 2/3 majority to remove the CBN. Alternatively, the CBN governor also has a board of directors, which can meet and also vote a pass of no confidence on CBN. And once that is done, it's gone. Remember, that was one of the things, even this current CBN governor, who is under suspension, went to court to stop the current CBN board of directors from meeting and removing him. So these things are there, provided in the Establishment Act. So when people say, the president intervened, that is Jonathan, suspended the former CBN governor and the current one, they've acted within their powers, as far as I'm concerned. They've acted within their powers. As far as the issue of policy in terms of the currency redenomination, yes, that is where maybe there was an overreach on the part of the presidency. But if a CBN governor is found to be so just because the CBN is independent, so we should hands off it. That's not possible.
What's your take?
Again, sorry, my unreserved apologies for being late. Again, I'm so sorry. I think there was a question of the CBN being rudderless or directionless, and it does. I think seem to be that it's not necessarily that its administrative functions are ongoing. That certainly the impression we have is that policy is being set from the center, and by the center we actually mean the State House, Asher Rock.
No, that's not what you asked. That's not what you asked. Is that what you talked about?
No.
That's not what you asked.
So
You're talking of
we're talking about presidential overreach into monetary policy and the CBN itself. So how do you reform that for the CBN to maintain its independence or pseudo-independence, as Ijeoma has said, or do you think that the status quo is cool?
So I guess that's what I'm trying to address with the question of the CBN has been characterized as being leaderless or rudderless, I think is the word that was used. And in truth, it probably isn't. Probably a certain segment of good governance advocates would say that it's kind of asking the question, should the president essentially be setting the CBN policy? And at the moment, he seems to be legally fine, but part of the problem with the presidency taking over at the moment, practically, right, is that there's a certain level of a lack of coherence, right? So we have, in fact, had what has been called a kind of managed float, but it's, in a sense, we haven't seen rates properly converge because it's not really, when you keep anomalous and dissonant items, like this question where you get an arbitrary pronouncement that the 41 items are still in access, are still ineligible for currency access, you really you relieve your dollar supply issues, reserves are going up, but you still undermine confidence in the market, right? Because as everyone can see, there is no possibility of a converged rate. You've still created a kind of special situation, which saps a lot of the rhetorical and like signaling virtue that you could have gotten from the act that you took. So there are things like that which they've gone like halfway, and part of the fear of having the president do this is he does what is politically expedient, not what makes any monetary sense. So they had to signal a change in policy, and it has been effective in liquidity terms. But the reason we didn't see the rate converge when it went up from the official rate and then down from the unofficial rate to some parallel that kind of reflected the fair value of the naira, because this is why you don't like politicians dictating monetary policy. It hasn't worked out well or effectively. Like it hasn't achieved the best aims of what it possibly could. That is because we have the presidency dictating what should happen. And so it's a little, I would say that there's a practical reason for the president not to intervene, if we're speaking just amongst ourselves, but his intervention in the sense was necessary, but has been gone about in the wrong way. I mean, the situation of the CBN was critical and acute. I think everyone would agree, particularly the president the CBN government is ultimately responsible to, I guess, the executive branch, and so there is no one else who could essentially instigate disciplinary or even policy-based action against the CBN governor. We wish it had been done in a different way, but there's the use of the DSS for what it's worth causes it causes it to look bad. It causes it to look politically motivated. So the CBN governor was not the most popular man in the world, certainly not. But here's my point. It's that classic thing, and I think they call it a bit of a tender, which is when someone is so unpopular that everyone overlooks the process by which you go after them, because everybody knows that everybody knows all the terrible things that they did. Process matters, particularly now that 30 days from it, right? It now starts to become a little bit, you did what was necessary, then it becomes a little bit, I wouldn't say like noxious or odious, but it starts to have a little bit of a stink about it when it just seems that you're going to go extrajudicially or extra process about the whole thing. Whether we all agree with the spirit of what you were doing, the process matters, particularly at the beginning of the administration, you kind of want to see a little bit of far thinking as to how this would go. Would this be permissible for any CBN governor going forward? Contravention of presidential rules attracts arrest by the DSS. That seems a little, if you just break it down into its component parts as to what is happening, it's a little anomalous and strange.
So I'll pick a few headline issues that has made the news. So I'll just get you. So let's look at electricity, which is like the big one. One of the things the new government did was to sign a bill. I think it's an existing bill, but of course, we still got credit for it, for basically decentralizing the electricity market. So I don't have any priors here, and you guys have all commented in depth at one point or the other on electricity. So I'll start with that. What is the problem with electricity, and is this new direction the way to? Because you get different views from different people. Some will say, there's not enough investment. Some will say, it's tariff. The tariff just has to keep going up. So some will say, there are operational issues with the discos. Some will blame the currency issue. So, some will blame the privatization, the last round of privatization that was going on. So the electricity structure and direction with which policy is going currently, what do you think, and how are we going in the right direction? If not, what can we do?
Was that not signed into law by the former president?
No, it's
It was not.
The former president altered the constitution to make electricity concurrent.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So on this side, Tinubu side.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think the electricity market is even, I don't know what is going on at the moment. Like you mentioned, there's so many issues, right? And it seems to be like one of those situations where Nigeria can't get something very basic, right? Because electricity supply is not so much an issue in so many countries. You know, even countries that are poorer than Nigeria. You could say, you know, we're a bit bigger, right? And so maybe managing it is a bit more chaotic or whatever. But the truth is, there's so many countries in Africa, majority are poorer than Nigeria, right? Politically, a lot of them are more unstable, you know, than Nigeria. Investment-wise, they have less investment. I mean, if you're thinking of investment, how many countries attract more investment than Nigeria? The continent is in such a sorry state, right? That South Africa hardly is able to do 10 billion in FPI these days, right? Egypt is a mess. Kenya is a mess. You know, Ghana is a mess, right? So those are the big countries in SSA and the northern region of Africa. And if you look at other countries, very poor, the business environment is not so attractive, which is interesting because it is until you want to expand into other markets, you see how, you know, you even be thankful for the Nigerian markets. I'm not joking, that, you know, we're all complaining about, because it's so hard to enter a lot of markets in Nigeria. So, I mean, I'm just saying that whatever it is, right, at the end of the day, you know, whether it is Genco or transmission company or discos or tariff, there's something fundamental that we're not getting right, and that we need to start doing better. Now, there's not one issue that is a problem, right? A particular issue you also don't mention is metering, for instance. You know, a lot of people are saying, you know, tariff, yes, if there's tariff, then you need to meter the customers, right? Then at some point, people started complaining that, you know, why should I be paying the same tariff, right, if I don't enjoy the same, you know, quality or in terms of supply of electricity? And then they introduced the tiered tariff structure where they have different bands, right? All those issues that we have are still issues, right? There was a time that gas supply was the issue, right? When we had insecurity in Niger Delta, and Gencos could not get gas for their plants, so it was a particular issue at some point. What I want to see is, yes, we need reforms, right? A lot of bills have been signed into law, a lot of partnerships have been entered into in the last administration, right? There was the Siemens, German, you know, stuff that was supposed to, you know, help discos inject some funds. And from what I heard from even industry participants, there was no buying, you know, even by the discos. From the discos, a lot of the discos did not. It was sort of something that was entirely almost government-led, right? And the discos were sort of, I don't know, persuaded, or what should I say, to like go along with it. But I don't think they were happy with such an arrangement. And if you want to reform a sector and you don't get the buy-in of stakeholders, I'm not sure how that is going to work, right? But what I'm trying to say is, it shouldn't be as difficult as it is, right? It shouldn't. All this, oh, there's lack of investment, oh, there's tariff, is metering. I don't know what is more difficult in Nigeria than any other country. The structure of the Nigerian economy compared to what you have in Ghana, in Kenya, or in any other market is the same. It's mostly rural, it's mostly informal, right? I think the problem with Nigeria is we're just bigger in every respect. And over time, we don't know how to plan. I was only conscious of electricity in Nigeria in the 2000s, right? Even then, I don't think it was bad as this. But I mean, my experience is a bit unique because I lived in the university quarters, right? So Obafemi University, that's where I grew up. And there were times where we could go months, you know, we would go months with, you know, proper power, right? So I don't know how it was in the 1980s or 70s. But I think one of the problems we have in Nigeria and that recurs very frequently is we don't know how to plan ahead, right? Until problems occur. I think some countries would also face that in Africa. So you have power supply issues, or you know, you have a market that is stable, relatively stable to an extent. You have power plants, you know, develop the power infrastructure, right? But over time, we don't think ahead. As population expands, right, demand for power goes up naturally, right? You don't even need to be a prosperous economy. Whether you are prosperous or not, the population expands. Ultimately, the demand for, you know, power goes up. You need to be able to anticipate those needs and to ensure that you continue to incentivize all, you know, players to invest. It's the same thing in the oil and gas sector. Ijeoma was talking about our, you know, infrastructure is aging, or the walls are aging. But if it's aging, every company knows that there's something called maintenance capex, right? Even if you don't want to grow capacity, you maintain. But in Nigeria, you don't maintain, not to talk of, you know, growing capacity. And at the end of the day, you have a policy environment that does not incentivize even a lot of producers to also be forward thinking or to be able to do it. And at the end of the day, everything collapses and you have a problem. Lagos State is facing it. Abuja looks fine. The people in Abuja are very happy with Abuja. But they're going to face the crisis in Lagos in a bit. You know, poor traffic, no water supply, you know, terrible you know, transportation infrastructure. So the problem in Nigeria, in electricity, the market, is we're not very forward thinking. And in terms of sort of what should be put in place to incentivize the operators, government has not been able, you know, to just find that balance, right? I think GECOs are generally healthier than fiscals in Nigeria, but even GECOs are still, you know, a lot of maybe their invoices still go unpaid, right? And the CBN steps in with more subsidies. The federal government steps in with more subsidies. So we need to have a grip on what is going on there. And yes, we know that we talk about tariff going up every time. It's not only in Nigeria, tariff goes up everywhere in the world, right? If it's their template is predicated on what is happening to inflation and exchange rates. And in addition to other technical, you know, they have the technical and economic aspects of the template. But, you know, inflation is extremely high, the exchange rate is moving anyhow. So at the end of the day, you see that having a sound macro basis does wonders for almost all industries. Whether you're in the power, whether you're in manufacturing, whether you're in electricity, having that sound macro environment from the fiscals in terms of regulation, in terms of supervision, to even the, you know, central banking in terms of controlling sort of prices in the economy, or interest rates. Financing also goes into, you know, the pricing for a lot of products. So that's it at the end of the day. We need to be more forward thinking, and we need to ensure that we do reforms in a way that will get buy-in from players in the market, especially when you have different players in the market. That's something we've not done. I think politicians can be very arrogant in Nigeria, where they say, oh, this is how we want to go about it. And if you're not doing it, there's nothing that's going to happen. MFLA thought it was so smart and he could do it. You know, you get FX from the government and you convert it at 460. Then you now think you can tell exporters to come and sell their own FX at 460. Right? Nobody is going to answer you, no matter how powerful you are. Because, you know, there's a limit, even no matter how powerful you are, there's a limit to what you can control. And they left their money offshore, right? He sanctioned some. When he saw that it was not working, what did he do? He introduced another stupid scheme and started saying, oh, don't worry, you know, I'll give you extra naira for every dollar you bring in. And I'm like, is that not a devaluation? Is that not sort of a devaluation to an extent? So you devalued it for some players, right? And then it happens with remittances. Remittances that is very retail driven. And you think you can tell people the rate, or you dictate to international money transfer operators the rate at which they are going to convert. Then they were converting in Naira and doing payouts at 460, right? I can tell my uncle or my sister or whoever I have there, there are other alternatives to get my money. Exactly. So reforms have to get buy-in, no matter how well intentioned they are or how good they are on the paper. If Gencos do not like it, if Discos do not like it, it's not going to work. A lot of people say Discos need to be recapitalized, that they need to attract investment. But even how you go about that, if the government says they want to do it, I don't think it should be the role of the government, right? But if the government says the role of what government should do should ensure that the prospects of that industry improve to the point that even Discos can then approach financiers that can see the bankability of what their proposals are and want to fund them. But if the government side is not good and Discos or whatever it is don't get the buy-in, it won't work. So, I mean, that is it, how I see the market for me.
Okay, so first let me declare my interests. I once worked with the BP, where we were responsible for the privatization of the power sector, the power sector reforms. I also sit on the board of Ikeja Electricity. So Adedayo, a lot of things you said are revolved around tariffs, even though you didn't want to call it. When you were talking of the macroeconomic basis, everything comes out. Everything is tariffs, nothing else. It's just the tariff structure. But in addition to the tariffs, so we have the beauty about what this electricity bill or law, it's not a law, has done is that it has finally decentralized transmission, which has been a big problem. Because as we all know, our generation capacity is actually much higher than what is being transmitted, by both the transmission company of Nigeria and the Discos. We have generation capacity. So when you're talking about planning, we already have about 80,000 megawatts stranded.
80,000?
8,000, sorry.
Yeah.
8,000 megawatts. About 8,000 or more, 9,000 actually, stranded. We have power generation plants in this country lying power. It's not a crying shame. It's not embarrassing. We have power plants. All these NIPPs that were built, they're not generating power. For two reasons. One, our tariff structure is not right. That the transmission company of Nigeria, the grid, cannot carry it. Even if the grid can carry it, the Discos probably have the willing capacity to the final consumers of about 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts. So all three ends of the entire electricity value chain have their challenges. But what is the common denominator? How do you make sure that you incentivize all operators to produce, to operate efficiently? It's all about the pricing structure. So we have to go to the upstream end of the electricity value chain. It starts with gas. Gas today is priced in dollars. And today, if we use the RD exchange rate, that's what we're talking about. Even if it's as $2 per million scoff, million standard cubic feet, that's piped into the power stations. So even if it's $2, so we're talking about 1,400. I don't know how that's broken down to kilowatt hours. Do you understand? So you have gas priced in dollars. Meanwhile, the gas producers, the oil and gas companies, are telling you that the gas they are selling to power producers is still subsidized. It's still below what they are exporting. It pays them more to export our gas through NLNG than to sell to power producers. So, should we also deregulate gas, just like we did petroleum, and sell gas at the market determined price to power producers? That is the Gencos. And then, of course, if you're now selling gas at the market determined price, you have incentivized oil and gas companies to invest more in gas to meet their domestic gas obligations. Because that's a major aspect of the PIE. They are expected to meet domestic gas obligations, but they will tell you it is not what they are. Why? Why? Because of the fiscal regime. You're selling gas at below what they will sell it abroad. There's an international market for gas, just like there's an international market for oil. So if you want to sell gas at a lower price, they're not making it what they want, because as you know, they're bringing their capital to invest in these projects, mainly from overseas. So at the end of it, it's all about the fiscal regime, which translates to pricing. If we want power on a regular basis, we need to get the pricing right. You said it, Adedayo, that the gencos are subsidized. That is why they are most profitable. They are the most profitable in the value chain. It's not because they are more efficient. It's because they are being subsidized. And the discos, when they get all the money, they ensure they meet. If they don't meet their minimum remittance obligations, they are penalized by both embarked and the regulator. So all the money that they get has to go back to the gencos, predominantly the gencos. All the money. At the end of this day, the discos are even struggling to pay salaries. One of the discos I sit on often goes to his parent company to assist them to pay salaries. Because all the money they generate goes back down the value chain. It's not sustainable. It all boils down to tariffs. And the good thing about if tariffs are market determined, it means it incentivizes every player in the value chain to invest more, from the oil and gas operators to the IPPs, or people who want to invest in IPPs, to people who even now can invest in transmission grids. Femi Otedola, just a few days ago, had a meeting, I'm sure you all saw the story, with the Lagos State government and the president of the African Development Bank, and they announced that they will be rolling out transmission grid for Lagos State. Wonderful.
And they announced that they were exploring.
Exploring the possibility. But let's say it's happens.
Because in Nigeria often, and in the power sector in particular,
Yes, I agree.
The signal and noise, right?
Yes, I agree. Okay, but let's say it happens. Do you know what that will do for Lagos?
I agree. So
do you understand? Because right now, what is happening is very unfortunate. He was talking, he didn't quite finish his sentence when he was doing the comparison with other African countries that were smaller. But I knew what he was alluding to. What he was alluding to was the fact that there are so many African countries, not smaller than Nigeria, but they seem to have more stable electricity. You only say that because the stable electricity is in their commercial nerve centers. Outside those commercial nerve centers, they are worse off than Nigeria. So you can fly into Accra and get 247 electricity. You will fly into Nairobi and get 247. Outside Nairobi is not the same. You go into Cairo and so on and so forth. But in our own case, we politically distribute power. The transmission company of Nigeria, because it is government owned, they tell them, okay, give Abuja 20%, give Lagos 10%, give Kano 15%. Who does that? If you have a market that is more viable, ideally you should give it to the more viable market, because that is where you generate most of your money. That was one of the problems with NEPA. The old utility that was renamed to PATN and bundle. You don't, political consideration should not play a role in how much a particular city or locale should have. Lagos has always, even when it was a one asset, when NEPA existed, Lagos always accounted for the 60% of NEPA's revenue. So does it not make sense that Lagos should have more power? But no, the transmission grid of Nigeria is told, oh, company on that, okay, distribute it this way, this way, this way, this way. So Lagos is competing with Kano and Kaduna that consumes much less than electricity.
Which is true, but there's a grid constraint there, right?
Yeah,
because the load, I know what I'm saying is like,
I've already talked about
Okay.
the grid constraint. So there's the grid constraint, then the political constitutions. So those two factors are there. Do you understand? But now with the Electricity Act, the new act that we now signed into law, this will enable operators perhaps getting, even through PPP agreement to state governments, to start getting on the grid and then generating, transmitting, distributing powers in cars or their distribution or their franchises, independent of TCN. And perhaps, if that is successful, TCN will die a natural death just like Nitel did. That is what I see happening. Or TCN will simply be focused on providing electricity to modern Nigeria. Sorry. Apologies. If anyone is offended by that statement.
No, I think Ijeoma is also very optimistic about the capacity of Nigerian states.
No,
Yeah, so,
how am I? What did I say that's positive for Nigerian states?
Yes, we said, decentralized, right? States can.
Like I said, PPP arrangement doesn't. I just said PPP arrangement. I'm not depending on
You
the
mean
states.
subnational, right?
Yeah.
well, but
I said PPP. I didn't say the state should do it.
But
PPP means that private sector is still involved.
But that's what the particular bill has done, which
Yes,
is it's nothing has worked so far, and the most effective lobbying effort came from, and the most effective and concerted lobbying effort for reform came from state governors and
Yes.
state governments, right? If you think about Lagos, Lagos and Kaduna in particular kind of led the charge with direct access to present in the same power, and they said devolve this power to us. It's kind of though one of those things where, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so what they've just decided is to change the hammer, right? Because from a status, and I can't use any other word, status X administration, the only people that they were willing to listen to as to hand the power over to us was other governments, right? They weren't listening to the people who said fundamentally deregulate the power industry. So we do come up against what the law now says is that if the state government can get its act together, then NERC and build its own regulator, build its own market, right? Then it ceases to be under the thumb of the NERC to the same extent that it is right now. When you think about the states that have the capacity, like, let's just be frank, I work in power systems for the municipal and state government.
Yeah.
Like Lagos, Kaduna, Rivers, although again, Rivers hasn't passed a law. Because if you think who has a law at the moment, right? It's Kaduna, Lagos, Edo, right?
And that's because national.
But in each case, you can look at the governor, and that's where it's
This is the
coming from.
background of the governors.
But then, so that's those three states. Then the other states that you could think of as having capacity to form something viable, maybe Kano, certainly Plateau State, it basically already exists there. They would just need to formalize NASCO and all of that, but the rest, as you say, will kind of they will struggle, and the reforms that have come about are such that if the state government doesn't do it, there's no alternate mechanism to take away the bad thing that was happening. I think we'll see like some step forward, but it will be very hard to see it as a widespread thing. And then I agree with you, we should address the low demand.
The transmission company of Nigeria can therefore provide electricity to those states that may not have the capacity.
So which is true.
That's
Part of the Nigerian problem has been we've constrained, as you said, with this sharing formula, the areas that should have grown.
Yes.
Right? So, and again, one of the things that is most interesting when you point out that despite, Azura and Afam Fast Power, roughly the same amount of electricity was wheeled out in distribution on the first day of Buhari's term, and it was 4,057 on the first day. On Wednesday, on the last day, it was 4,052. So when you think about arguably, despite adding almost 800 megawatts to the grid, I would say it went backwards in a sense, right? And so there has been a suffocation problem, but then the question is, has the mooted alternative now, will that have a widespread effect? I think they've gone about it being like well, this is the only thing we can think to do, which I can understand. Let's say you're on Ikeja or Echo Disco. There's a close relationship with the governor who instead of fighting the discos, this current present governor has said, I have two, let me manage them in the most efficient way. Like, I'm not even trying for deregulation of the disco franchise, I just want to empower them to really lead to incremental improvements. It is a problem, right? The discos are not they're not in good health, right? So, yes, okay, fine. You've now, as an independent power producer, I can now have a close relationship with my customers, but still those customers aren't in great health. Will the new electricity regulator in the various states have pricing power to the same extent, like without NERC oversight? This is an ambiguous question. And so when you think about the reforms that are necessary, people are not really necessarily excited. Like, of course, if the government says, I want to see Otedola and the head of the end Akinwumi, of course they'll go and see him, etc. They probably have other things about their CFOs and their private homes they wanted to talk about with him, so they'll shake hands and take a picture. But you have to look at the viability of the system. Where's the gas and fuel supply for all of these IPPs it's supposed to come from? Lagos is not, it's not a net energy producer in any way, shape, or form. So you're depending upon a series of systems.
No, they're talking about transmission system, not an IP. Transmission.
Okay, which is true.
Which is not an IP.
But the transmission grid, per the new act, can only be within the bounds of Lagos State. So you're transmitting from what to where? Like, we have the customers, but we don't have the generation. Okay, which is true. So
and then we have a lot of smaller IPPs in Lagos too, in addition to IPP. And then perhaps if they do it, if they establish a transmission grid for the state, it probably will encourage other people to invest in generation too in Lagos.
Potentially. You heard one thing is, in the project development life cycle of a power plant, particularly something independent, like the Azure guys wrote a fantastic book, I think it's called like High Voltage, detailing like the nitty-gritty of how they got from the idea through Maya Capital to Azure. What you are hoping, I guess, with this new thing is to activate plans people already had in place, which is maybe get AES and run back or something. But it is a little bit of a tough sell because it's so opaque, and it looks as if the solution is not an engineered solution, but it's once again a political one. This is just my assessment of it, which is that like it looks nice, and I can see how the federal government felt happy to have seen power somehow to the states, but like I don't see a fundamental approval just because it's conceded to the states. Even high capacity states, I think, will struggle to get the assurances to make the market work in place. Fuel supply, the ability to set prices, and then the ability to actually finance the infrastructure that they need in some coherent way. It's a step, but maybe sideways or diagonally as opposed to forward.
Yeah, I'm going to, this is my last question. So if you guys can, I know that say it doesn't have hypnotizing powers, but let's assume you do. If you can fix something or you can add something to the ongoing current policy basket, so it could be anything, what would it be? And after that, we can then move to Q&A for everybody, and after which we'll just have lunch. So after Ijeoma, so if you are the president, what is the most urgent thing on the agenda for you?
Maybe NNPC. Take apart that institution. NNPC. Take apart through the reforms. Maybe NNPC. That's the first time. Look at NNPC.
Why isn't there any like transparency about NNPC?
everybody uses it as his ATM. All governments use it as its ATM, as their ATM. It's very important to them. Slush funds, the rest, so let's not have any for slush funds. Let's not have any. And all governments, all administrations of this, all can be solved, and that's challenging.
But isn't the root cause of its slush fundness the fact that we never implement a budget? I'm trying to think of the last budget that was in any way substantially implemented, right?
So slush funds not because for extra budgetary expenditure, but slush funds for politicians.
I agree with you, but one of the easiest, and I'm almost like quoting someone in government, right? Is one of the things is we've been tasked to run this country on an executive basis. There's a budget, etc. We never really get the financing to implement the budget, but we still have to continue running the country. If you were running like a family business or something like that, you would look to do the things that you feel you should do. You would look where the money was, right? But the problem is because the money is not tied to the budget, it becomes a cycle where it becomes excusable to be lazy, right? Because the discipline that will come from an actual implementing of fiscal regime by statute and per the statute is easy to skip over because that part has not been done properly. That's why I said that maybe the LMPC problem is it comes from a lack of discipline from the legislature really, which is if they pass timely budgets, said here's the money, go and implement, it would be hard to justify the LMPC. Because every time you go to LMPC, it's an emergency, it's an exigent thing, it's a security matter or something, right? And so, are you going to put people's lives in danger over paperwork? Is the fundamental argument that they have, right? But so maybe the problem lies upstream in the they're not funded properly the way they should be. And they would still steal the properly funded money, but at least they wouldn't have the excuse to go into LMPC.
Man, if there's one thing, right? It's hard to, it has to be one thing that will be very transformative. Immediately, right?
Yeah.
I would say it's fiscal policy reforms.
What does that mean?
Okay, I'll explain. I think the number one problem, if there's one problem I want to solve in Nigeria, that if I want to give to Nigeria something, it is low and stable inflation. That's the most important thing I would give to Nigerians. And it's because we say, oh, we're a poor country, right? We say, oh, we have a 40% poverty rate. We have multi-dimensional poverty, about 63%, right, of people. And every time you see people, when you think in terms of, Nigerians suffer, right? The middle class suffers. Average, the poor ones, the middle class. With the recent reforms, we all know people who have cars are parking it in their homes, right? And maybe carpooling with someone else just to reduce the cost of transportation. And a lot of it is tied, and this is why the role of the central bank is just so important. That objective, although people say it's not a singular objective in Nigeria, where the central bank has to focus on price stability, right? They say in Nigeria we have other things, maximum employment and growth, which are sometimes often conflicting, or everybody knows with an understanding of basic economic theory knows that you can be pursuing two conflicting objectives. You would, at the end of the day, do badly and both. That's what happened under MFLA. You gave the government 22.7 trillion, right? There is no results, there's no growth to show for it. Inflation is a problem. We are 22.7%. Throughout its tenure, he never achieved the target of single digits, 9%. And then a lot of the problems we talk about, whether it is I wrote an article on why Nigerians are so happy. We are so obsessed with the exchange rate and fuel subsidies, and nobody complains about the price of rice or the price of basic items. Meanwhile, those ones are a more prominent cause of poverty. if I have a minimum wage of 18,000 naira and inflation of 5%, right, then I mean I would fare better than in an environment where inflation is 12% and rising. Because what it means is prices double every 6 years in Nigeria. And we know that individual consumption baskets, what you buy is different from what I buy. So my own personal inflation might even be worse than overall inflation rates. Right? In fact, the poorer you are in Nigeria, the worse inflation is for you. And it's such an important point that people don't pay attention to. We say a lot of structural factors, affect food prices. Who buys? When you look at the consumption basket of Nigerians across, maybe social classes or economic, it is food, and it is the poor that spend the majority of their budgets, right, on food. And so if you give them low and cheap, stable and cheap prices, it helps, and it helps businesses as well. We talk about, what is the price of financing? Price of financing, and high inflation environment. Nobody wants to come into that environment. Investors don't want to come into that environment unless, there's sort of, it's not necessarily that high inflation is evil. The problem is we have high inflation, but we don't seem to know what to do about it, right? Which is why you have high inflation, and money supply in Nigeria was growing at almost 30%. I don't understand. Even if you are a central bank governor who believes that structural factors are very, an important, determinants. I always say there are some things in economics. Economics, they get a lot of things wrong, right? But there are some things that there is a consensus on, that sort of everybody has gotten to that point that if you have high inflation in your economy, it is priority that you must bring it down for things to, sort of get better. Because it directly hurts people's pockets. It is hurting your pocket directly. So this is not, you could say, oh, there's no power, right? Nigerians have found a way to sort of, I'll get an inverter, but when prices are jumping and rising, it becomes very difficult. Financing-wise also, again, you're thinking of the discos, they need to get financing, right? Petroleum marketers need to get financing, oil and gas producers need to get financing, the road sector needs to get financing. How do you get financing if interest rate is elevated? How do you bring down interest rate if inflation is extremely high? You have wage pressures. So, I'm CEO, and people are asking, we have to do salary adjustments, right? Because it became very difficult. We have an office in Lekki, even though we're mostly remote, but sometimes, we have to shoot in the office. So you require people to come to the office. And at some point, we have NYC interns, right? And even I sat down and calculated, and I saw that this is not making sense. Do you get? So when prices are rising, there's even more pressure on employers that, wages have to go up. Labor is starting to say, we increased minimum wages in 2019. A lot of states have not implemented that minimum wage increase. And now, everybody's now saying we need what? A higher minimum.
200,000 naira.
If states can't pay 30,000 naira, how are you going to get them to pay 100,000? And it's actually true. If you adjust our minimum wage for sort of inflation impact, we should be around 100,000. So it actually makes sense. But the point is, who is going to pay it? Right? The private sector, you can't enforce it on the private sector. Certainly, you could want to enforce it on states. Even you can't enforce it on states.
Also, it would be hugely inflationary. If you think inflation is bad right now, try and triple everyone's salary.
I always say,
I'm not talking from a moral basis. I'm just talking practically. If you attempted to do it,
yes, it's inflationary, but it also increases aggregate demand, which is very, very vital for productivity.
It increases formal, numerical aggregate demand.
What I always say in Nigeria is, it is not going to be inflationary because nobody is going to pay it. It's true. Because, let's think about it. It is only the person that announces it that can pay it. That is the federal government. The federal government thinks, it's against what we say.
Minimum wages work, to be
right,
fair.
it's what we say that about prices, right? When Ijeoma was making the point that they think they can dictate prices politically and say, minimum wage is going to be 30,000. Everybody implement it. Right? Meanwhile, states are different. States are different. They have different
They can't
capacities.
impose it.
Right? So you can't impose it on even state governments, not to mention the private employers. And the federal government is able to do this because they know that they don't have to earn it to pay for it. Right? Which is why when they increase minimum wage, directors start earning more to, if you saw the last negotiations, they would say they're raising minimum wage, which is for people, at the bottom.
Yes.
But once you see, it's also very aggressive across this entire remuneration
How
structure.
the assembly fees goes.
Exactly. Everything goes up. But again, why I said government can afford to do it is because they know that at the end of the day, if I don't earn the money to pay it, what else? I can go and borrow in the bonds market or get CBN to give me money. States don't have that luxury, right? They can get loans from banks, but even banks will look at you and say, the one I gave you the last time, you're not paying.
Also, the fact allocation has basically collapsed.
Yeah.
Like that's the legacy of the Buhari government.
So, low and inflation, if we, ensure that we just, it's more predictable, it helps people plan better, it helps also even people, we're a poor population, but it helps people, with their purchasing power. We say one of the most fundamental functions of money is store value. Right? You want to store value.
Would you describe the Naira as a store of value?
No. Naturally, inflation, every country aspires to have a level of inflation that is enough. You want to have inflation levels that can incentivize the supply sector, right? And not destroy the consumption sector, right? Which is why even a lot of central banks are looking for inflation before COVID. Because, it might be good for consumers, but is it good for producers? What you want is a balance. What is good for producers and what is good for consumers, right? If it's too high, then it becomes very destructive for everybody. So if there's one singular thing I think can make things a bit different is if we, from the fiscal side, from the monetary side, if they take sort of actions that would ensure that we bring that pressure down on people, because you have your 100,000 naira minimum wage today. In the next 5 years, you're already thinking of another 200,000, sort of minimum wage if you're in an environment where prices are doubling. In the US, if you have 2% inflation or 1% inflation, before prices, go up that significantly, it doesn't.
It does. But the US's inflation is classically high.
It just come down. The peak was 9%. It's at 3% now. Yeah, 3%.
Okay.
It was 9% in 2020. That was the peak. It was the highest in like 40 years, which is a good thing, right? And now it's down to.
Well, do you think it was a good thing?
That inflation.
Yes. Okay. I thought you meant the high inflation. You're saying it's coming down.
No, that it has come down very significantly. It's Europe that is finding it hard.
Yeah.
Right, to bring down inflation.
Well, slow down, right? Because US inflation has never gone negative, right? It's just prices are not increasing as rapidly as
Inflation is naturally prices going up, but you have to slow the rate at which prices are rising. You have to sort of slow it down. So that means people also have confidence in the currency, because
which is true, but that's a world reserve currency. They are essentially anomalous. Like in the UK, inflation is 9%. In Germany, it's above 6%. So what I'm saying is, like, you're talking about the US is an exceptional country.
The US is an exceptional country, but low inflation is not only a US phenomenon. Okay. Low and stable inflation.
But it is within the OECD at the moment. It is a US phenomenon.
What you said?
I think within the top 30 economies in the world, their ability to bring it down has been a US phenomenon. The UK can't manage it.
The UK can, you have to also think of Europe. The energy problems in Europe is a major factor.
It's a huge
inflation problem.
But we're facing that same thing right now. Think about it. We're net energy price increases perplexingly for us.
For us, when you mean us,
like Nigeria, we feel them more acutely than we feel the benefits. Right? As a petro state, we should we should welcome higher world energy prices.
And the only reason you used to welcome higher energy prices is because you had subsidies. Look at other major oil producers. Now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're still subsidized.
Yes.
They're still subsidized. Even Angola, I see, just as it's raised its petrol price, the bulk price, it's still subsidized.
I think the problem for me is it's not that you can't have periods. I always say human beings, we live in such a chaotic life, right? But no one likes more stability than we do. But life doesn't work that way. We know, like, from when you're young to an adult, right? Nothing is ever stable. Your family is not even stable. Your own personal life is not stable. So why do you want everything to be stable? You know, the same price all through. Exchange rate must not change. This must not change. You will have periods of problems. You have recessions, right? Recessions occur very frequently in almost all countries of the world, maybe apart from Australia, right? The question is, how do you recover? How do you help your economy recover faster? You can't be in a permanent state of misfortune, like Zimbabwe or Venezuela. You can, but you don't want it.
Yeah,
but you don't want it. You can tolerate high inflation for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. In Nigeria, we are in a permanent inflation crisis. We've been in a permanent inflation crisis. That is what should not be. If it's a situation where you had it jump up for maybe 1, 2 years, and it goes down for an extended period of time, no one will be worried. But in Nigeria, it's sort of like that permanent state. Other parts of Africa are lucky in the sense that Francophone West Africa, for instance, because of whatever monetary arrangement they have. I obsess a lot about inflation with Shum. And you can go and track the economies in SSE. We are at the bottom 10. And I'm not joking. Over the past decade, in terms of inflation performance, we are at the bottom 10.
Do you exclude the CFA countries from that calculation?
I do not.
If we don't control their
if I exclude them, we have about 43 in sub-Saharan Africa countries. If I exclude Francophone countries, we are still going to be in the
close to the bottom.
The bottom quintile. It's the truth. It's a problem.
So it's funny because I'd say, you know, electricity used to be, it's really my bailiwick, and it used to be, and I used to be one of those tariff absolutists. Just change the tariff, the price signal is the most important thing. But it's so strange. I actually think that the time for that has passed. That had they done that on the heels of the privatization, or even stuck to the monetary regimes, that it would have built up enough credibility that the price signal would be indicative and tied to investment. I don't know, as someone who does this for a living, right, that even if you told me that you're going to move the price, the tariff, municipal tariff to 150 naira, which would be politically extremely tough, that would even be sufficient. Like I think that sometimes these things like can come almost unfixable, and so I would actually park the power sector because I really do think that the grid is dead, like it's just done for at least my generation. I want to talk about something that's actually not very fashionable any longer, but land tenure reform. So in 2014, yeah, it's just there have been so many more urgent problems that we've been beset by that we can't really think about the big picture. But probably the biggest supply side reform that I think would transform is the De Soto argument, which is that, you know, almost 97% of non-forested arable land in Nigeria is not under any sort of cultivation at all. And yet, bizarrely, the plot size, average plot sizes under cultivation have been shrinking. They shrunk up until 2020. And again, rather idiotically, in my opinion, the World Bank stopped doing business, which, whatever you think about the functionality or the outcome, provided a really good base of measured progress and statistics from which people used to be able to draw their own conclusions. And this question of land title, outside of, you know, the major cities, right, it's hugely crippling, right? People cannot borrow against their land, they have no formal ownership of it. It creates testing problems all down the line. It's really just such a mess. And because we have like almost no like ability to formally bring uncultivated land into the agricultural processing, then it's a self-owned supply side problem. Why should the state government, presumptively own all the land? Not a strong eminent domain law, but a presumption that they own it, and then you can lease it back from them. It's completely.
There's no hope in hell. The states will not just allow.
It's not even just that. The actual truth is we have like.
There's no hope.
For the next 4 years, sorry, we have a president who fundamentally does not believe in it because he was an extremely powerful state governor, and he cannot conceive of.
Even if you believe, let's say, even if you had 10 years down the line, the president
Yeah.
can pass it because it's a constitutional issue.
Yes, right. And,
So
and
it
the last time
requires
it
the
went.
states to pass it.
Two-thirds.
So how do you get it reformed? That's the biggest challenge.
I mean, it's a.
Unless it's excised out of the constitution. If not,
Well,
we can't, there's nothing we can
which it can be. It was
How?
added. It was
Would
added.
you?
It was added in a rather ad hoc fashion,
It
right?
still requires the states to excise it.
I think that's the most
That is
frustrating thing.
It's so frustrating, the Land Use Act. The most frustrating legislation I've ever seen.
I mean, it was a passenger's revenge
Yes,
show
it
on
was.
Nigerians.
I think so. Because he promulgated that
Yeah.
as a military president.
He was like, and then in that classic when he came back, right? In order to, he doubled down on it. Right? It's the same way Buhari reran his first term, right? To our detriment. Something in history, I don't know what.
Yeah, it was all about his first.
But
military-
it was just about rerunning the first
Yeah.
day and showing it should have worked. So I know how much of a long shot it's. I know for a fact that this president is like vehemently opposed to it. So like I don't know how it would happen, but it's the like shouting in the wilderness. It's the one thing where it's like this would actually make everybody all of the problems that we identified would get better, some dramatically, some not at all, right? By people having more solid and secure access to the land. But like, it's so funny that we all agree, but no one even like has an argument about it because
We don't know how to.
Well, because-
That's the problem.
well, because
I don't think anybody is in disagreement. Our problem is show us a way to go about it. That's our problem. We all agree that land is.
I mean, we clearly don't all agree because it went.
Maybe except the state
No,
government.
not even that. So okay, and they may be their representatives in the National Assembly because when it was mooted like 18 months ago, amongst a slate of reforms, I'd imagine that again, you sit in rooms like this, it's like there's not a dissenting voice. It went down in the House of Assembly with maybe like 10% of the votes. It was like 90-10
I think
against.
it's even better. National Assembly, there is even a problem with the National Assembly to pass it. But after the National Assembly, it has to go back to states. And you know that the governors have acting control of the states. No, the state
Of the state
assembly.
assembly.
In fact, it's so bad that even federal government is not as powerful
As the state government.
because federal government, you go to a state governor and say, "Oh, I want to do a project, I need land."
Yeah.
If the state governor does not
There's
approve,
nothing
there's
you can
nothing you can do.
So the problem is the states. There's a high likelihood that in the foreseeable future, when I have a national assembly where it could be passed,
Yes.
we have to trickle down to the states, and that's where it will be killed.
Which is. So here my point.
Again, if there's a way we can hypnotize politicians, but incentives are misaligned.
Inception. Something like Inception.
So like, you can just ask questions.
So, I've been thinking about the rule of law a lot, and you all know how important it is to economic outcomes, right? And we're coming, off the back of an administration that has a total disregard for the rule of law. They essentially disobey court orders, right? I mean, let me not spend too much time on that. But what I want to ask, and any of the panelists can take this, is what would you like to see done, in terms of on the justice ecosystem, right from the way cases are kind of investigated and prosecuted to the criminal justice system, which is the fundamental cog in the wheel of progress in Nigeria. What we want to see happen along that entire ecosystem, justice ecosystem, that will lead to better economic outcome. What would you suggest the kind of narrow focus from in terms of investigation, prosecution, and also corrections as well? So that's my general question.
One thing I would like to see is something as simple as obedience of court orders. We have states and federal governments. Court orders are given or rulings and they're totally ignored. Some have to do with our economy. Some they just ignore them as long as they don't see it as favoring whoever is in charge. So obedience of court orders is a very, very simple thing that we would like to see if they can start complying with. The non-empowerment of the DSS right now, you pointed that out. Well, do we think it's injury? It's not. It's not. It's not injury. The DSS has been, right now the DSS has either invited, well, DSS, SSS, same institution. The DSS has either invited or has under its custody 2 or 3 people. For reasons we don't understand. There's no way anybody can tell you that maybe there was involved terrorism finance.
Well, let me say, that's definitely not why he was arrested.
It wasn't the reason exactly. Or who is the other person on power? If you have any corruption allegations, send them to the relevant authorities to investigate and prosecute. But by the time you encourage DSS, maybe the Zamfara governor, maybe he might have been involved in mining. Like I said, there's conflict in the state because of mining. Maybe he might be the exception. I really don't know. But by the time you see the DSS overreaching itself and arresting and detaining people illicitly, never forget that the same DSS detained Dasuki for 5 years without persecution. Without persecution. That is no persecution. Someone was detained and then he was released and his case died. So he has served out his sentence. Extradition, judiciary. Yes, it was done through extrajudicial means. So this is so if we continue, so Buhari set a precedent with DSS, and it looks like it's going to continue. And my fear is going to be worse. Because for some strange reason, I don't know what that is relationship with DSS teach. Because even you could see the kind of even before he became president, an external party was not in government, yet he appeared to be giving the DSS orders. So that is one area, if we're not careful, we're going to see the decimation even of the judiciary. Because you should not forget, and the DSS once went to the House of Judges in the dead of the night to try and arrest a number of judges. So that is an area that I think we should focus on, and please let me try and make some noise and caution that we do not want to devolve into the states if care is not taken. That is one area I'm very concerned about.
Yeah, rather frustratingly, I suppose, you bummed me out because I was about to say more like a more robust judicial system. Right? So if I think in 2021 and 2022, the courts were just closed for months, right? Whatever you say about the efficacy of the legal system as it exists in Nigeria, right? When you have 9 months of the courts, like they closed, I think 2020 they opened in August or something, right? Then they closed again. Like how can courts be closed from February to August? You can't file lawsuits, you can't seek to join or enforce contracts, you can't do anything. It really, I'm not going to trivialize them by calling them anomalous, but these questions of the presidency picking on particular people, so a Kanu or a Dasuki, or at this point, the Mata Edefiele, right? That's a problem that is at the discretion of certain political office holders. The larger dysfunction in our judicial system is a lack of redress and justice that exists for the majority of citizens who the government wouldn't bother ignoring a habeas corpus order for me or Johnny person, but it is still difficult for us to get that order because the judicial system doesn't work very well, and it does seem to be, I wouldn't say like extremely poorly resourced, but wherever the resources are going, it is not towards any effective justiciability for disputes in this country. And it goes everywhere from prosecution to the enforcement of contracts, and I don't think any of it is working. And I would try and basically get the judges together and be like, what is going on? What do you like? Apart from your salaries and your cars and your allowances, what do you need to actually deliver justice in this country?
This is it. We've come to the end of our program, Ideas Untrapped Policy Shop. A special thanks to our panelists, Ijeoma, Timi, and Adedayo. We'd also like to thank our guests for coming. We'll see you in 90 days.